Hello, hello, hello! Welcome to What the Trans, the pod telling you what the trans is going on. I'm Michelle O'Toole. Ashley is still on a break, so you're stuck with me, emitting my voice sounds into your ear hairs, or however that works. I don't know how ears work. Let's just cut right to it, shall we? We're going to start off with some news. First up, it turns out that the anti-trans press has officially been designated full of shit, according to the UK press regulator Ipso. Starting off with the Times, that newspaper that you can only ever find at your racist granddad's house, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, or Ipso, have ruled that a Sunday Times article written by cheap, transphobic shit goblin Andrew Gilligan was officially misleading. Surprise, surprise, surprise. The article, which ran with the headline, "Ladies Lose at City Landmarks May Open to Trans Women," gave the misleading impression that public toilets provided by the City of London Corporation had only recently opened their doors to transgender people. The actual truth of the matter was that transgender people have been legally allowed to use the toilets of their choice since 2011, thanks to the Equality Act. This news story was clearly an attempt by Gilligan to create an uproar out of old news and to repackage something very mundane and ordinary into something that would get the bigots clicking. The article has since been pulled from the Times website and a retraction has been published. So it's safe to say that now Gilligan has been caught red-handed trying to stir up controversy over something that has been allowed for 7 years without anyone noticing. It is clear what his agenda is. Everything about this article was trying to paint a 7 years long inclusive policy as a new and dangerous threat to women, and it even included quotes from quote-unquote feminists who further gave the impression that this policy was something new and alarming, rather than the actual truth that trans people have been using the right toilets in the City of London for years now, and nobody has noticed. Would you look at that? This isn't the first time Gilligan has been caught writing word poison. According to a report by Pink News' Nick Duffy back in October 2017, the Times published an article with the headline, "Charity Ban as Boy Forced to Live as Girl," that alleged that the trans kids charity Mermaids was banned from contacting the family of an alleged trans girl, and that Mermaid advocates fast-track cross-sex hormone treatment for children. Both of these claims were false and clearly flat-out lies, clearly cooked up by a ridiculous goblin man whose goal was to give fuel to transphobes for no other reason than to get the clicks and stir up controversy instead of writing the actual truth. Andrew Gilligan is the worst example of a journalist, and every word that man says should be questioned, as he is clearly very okay with lying to make a good story for bastards. But he isn't the only one getting in on the pants on fire act. Up next is the Daily Mail, which recently published a correction after also being found to have misled its readers about Mermaid's stance on hormones. Their article, "Transgender Drugs for Sale Online at £25, which, you know, if you're suffering incredible dysphoria, that's a steal at twice the price, originally gave the impression that mermaids deem hormone drugs as dangerous to children, causing, and I quote, "distressing bodily changes that can lead to an increased risk of anxiety, depression, self-harm and suicide," when in actual fact, the mermaid's claim was that those things will happen because of waiting times and the onset of puberty-related dysphoria. So what they did was basically take a thing mermaids had said and use that as an argument against the charity and hormones in general, which was a flat-out fucking lie. All these lies clearly reveal an intense anti-trans agenda in certain parts of the British press, and it presents everything related to transness as a dangerous new thing that must be curbed to protect children, which is... it's not ideal. Moving on to the Daily Telegraph, which is, oh man, this section is never going to fucking end if we're going to be talking about the right-wing press and all their lies. But moving on, the Daily Telegraph has gone and pulled the same trick and claimed that a very old and mundane policy is actually something new and terrifying. On the 10th of January, the Telegraph published on their front page a story with the headline, "NHS trans row as men get access to women's wards if they identify as female," which is... okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Right. The article argues that trans women are men, that trans women are potentially dangerous, and by default are likely to cause incredible distress to cisgender women, and that the NHS policy will allow cisgender men, or just men, to get moved to female wards for creepy reasons. This is in spite of the fact that, again, trans patient rights to be allocated onto the appropriate ward have been protected since 2011 under the Equality Act and since 2004 under the Gender Recognition Act, and has been official policy by the NHS for decades, literally decades, without complaint till now. This ridiculous non-story made its way to the high-level academic debate masterclass Loose Women, that mid-afternoon chat show on ITV, which handled the issue with the delicacy and sensitivity of someone who was trying to murder a horse with a hammer. And I'm not going to get too much into what was actually said in the show because it was all garbage and nonsense, But it's safe to say that the hateful message that trans women are something to be feared was received by many thousands of people up and down the country. So what is to take away from this? It can be so easy to be disheartened by the constant lies, bullshit, and tactical inaccuracies that regularly get put out by bastards to influence the never-ending national conversation about trans people. That never seems to include any actual trans people. But the thing is, I believe we can make changes. I think we can and must speak out. We are part of the country. Our voices are needed in this national conversation. I think we can and must speak out. You, listener person, you. With the headphones on, you can speak out. You can affect the national conversation about trans people, if only in a small way, but at least it's something. For those who are able and who are willing and relatively mentally healthy, now is the time to tell your stories to anyone who will listen. Start a blog, start a YouTube channel, start a podcast. I did it. I did it with 30 quid to buy a microphone and my phone. That's all I'm using. You can do this too. Hell, if you start a podcast, come be a guest on this one. I'll help you promote it. Then I can go on your one and, it'll be a lovely, podcast mashup thing. Let's just get our stories out there. I mean, hell, if you just want to be on the show to tell your story, just tweet me at What the Trans and we can probably set it up. Just hit me up. We'll try and work something out. The only way to combat lies of this magnitude is with the truth. So let's do that. And don't forget that the NHS policy in this regard is unlikely to change. You have your rights. Fight for them. If you find yourself in a hospital and you're in the unfortunate position of having someone protest your presence there, you are in the right. Don't let them win. Now, in much better news, Brighton and Hove City Council has approved plans to teach children a more inclusive sex education curriculum which will cover transgender people, as well as same-sex relationships, and including the fact that periods are not a thing that only happens to cisgender women. Trans guys, non-binary people, periods everywhere. According to a report in The Telegraph that didn't actually suck, sex and relationship classes will become compulsory in the whole of the UK in 2020. But right now the draft recommendations say schools are free to determine how they deal with the teaching of LGBT issues. But Brighton and Hove Council have taken the ball and are running with it, aiming to make their sex and relationship education as LGBT inclusive as possible. This is, of course, wonderful news for anyone who went to school in the dark before times, where all we got was getting shown how to put on a condom on a banana, whilst your science teacher screams at you, "Don't fuck anyone, gay people don't exist, AIDS, AIDS, AIDS." And hopefully, Brighton and Hove won't be the only place to really go to town on giving the kids the information they need to know about how to navigate this wonderfully diverse human species that we are. We are pretty diverse as a group. I even once met a guy who likes sprouts. Humans are pretty diverse. I mean, liking sprouts is patently absurd, but some people out there do it. People are gonna people, and there is no one way to be a people. If you happen to be a parent, or just curious, now would be a good time to look into what sex education looks like in your local area, and seeing if there's anything you can do to help make things a bit more inclusive if they are currently not as great as they could be. Again, you have the power to make incredible changes for the betterment of the trans community and society as a whole, so get to work if you are able. But do not, under any circumstances, run into a school in the middle of the day screaming about sex education uninvited. Believe me, I know for a fact that this is the wrong way to go about things, and let's just move on to the next thing. Speaking of terrible and harmful life mistakes, Donald Trump is still in charge of America, and that is awful for just about everyone on this planet. But it is especially bad for transgender people right now, who are very much in the line of Trump's stupid fire. Recent developments in his mission to ban transgender people from the military have not been great, as a federal court has ruled in favour of the ban. But there is still hope for transgender service members who, according to various reports, are living in constant fear of being booted out of their jobs, which is a pretty legitimate fear, when your boss is essentially an orange transphobic, nasty goblin man. As many judges across the country have ruled against the ban, claiming it is unconstitutional, there is still hope for transgender service members right now. So as it stands, the Trump trans ban, I had to say that slowly, is not in effect, but the fight continues as Trump's base is a nightmare of awful, and fucking other trans people is a surefire way for him to win the votes of gits and ghouls. But it does seem that anti-transgender sentiment is growing on the American right. The latest example of this is transphobic trolls review bombing a documentary about American trans military service people. The movie titled Trans Military covers the story of 4 trans military people, soldiers and the like, which has drawn the ire of the worst people because trans people living openly in their favourite institution is abhorrent to them. GLAAD has tweeted out encouragement for the community to go and watch the movie and leave positive reviews on their iTunes to counterbalance the bastards. But the thing to take away from this is, if you are travelling to the States anytime soon, many states will not be safe for you. That is the simple truth. I wish I could dress that up as something better, but that is just not the case. States like North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi are especially dangerous to be an openly transgender person right now. If you are going to the states, do try to stick to the cities on the coast and avoid states that voted in Trump by a wide margin. Some places there'll be some exceptions. Obviously, Austin in Texas is a very liberal city, but I don't know. I don't think I would go to Texas at all at this point for my own personal safety. But that's just me. Maybe I'm overreacting. If there's any American trans people listening to this, let me know how you're doing there. Give me a tweet at WhatTheTrans. Or send me a message from my website, whatthetrans.wordpress.com. Let me know how you're doing there. Am I wrong to be saying this? I mean, it feels like I'm right here. Your commander-in-chief has made it his life's mission to make trans lives a nightmare. So am I just being way over the top? Am I being some kind of xenophobic here? Or is this the real thing? I don't know. Let me know. I will submit to your knowledge on the subject, because you're going to know better than me. I'm just an idiot trans woman in a London bedsit, essentially. But anyway, the big news of the bye-week in America is that Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren has officially reversed her opinion on trans people. Back in 2012, whilst commenting on the case of a transgender woman prisoner taking the Massachusetts prison system to court over them denying her access to gender reassignment surgery, Warren said that the surgery was, quote, not a good use of taxpayer dollars. But she has since come out in favour of medically necessary services for trans people, whether in the military or in prisons. Now, some of you will be cynical about this change, and I totally get why, but while it's a damn shame that she was so late to the Equality Party, it's probably better to focus on the fact that she is here now, and as it stands, she's probably the best hope for getting rid of that colossal bum nugget from the White House. There is hope for America yet, and whilst Warren may well be the lesser of two evils, one of the evils is a fascist orange nightmare, and the other is Elizabeth Warren. You gotta go with Elizabeth Warren, right? I mean, that's a no-brainer. If you know any trans people in the United States, do check in on them and make sure that they are okay. And if you have some cash, go give some to the American Civil Liberties Union. They are fighting a lot of court cases all over America to fight the transgender military ban, as well as potential fights in the future for federal, national recognition of trans identities. Go give some cash at www.aclu.org, and don't worry, I will stick that link in the description of this episode. Okay, next we have a couple of bits of sad news, starting with Julia Grant. The beloved trans activist and star of the British documentary series A Change of Sex has died at the age of 64. Julia was well known in the British trans community thanks to her appearances in the long-running documentary series that proved controversial at the time and is widely believed to be the first British documentary films about trans people to ever be broadcast, in the country. She was also known for championing the Manchester Gay Village on Canal Street and running the Hollywood Show Bar, which I had no idea about, even though I've been there plenty of times in the past. And while some of her views may have split the trans community over the years, her contributions to trans equality and greater LGBT activism cannot be undersold, as she offered up her story to the general public at potentially great personal cost and showed to the thousands of closeted trans people who are watching a documentary that there are options for them out there. Also, Rihanna Humble, a far less known but equally impactful trans activist and former councillor, has also died at the age of 62. Rihanna served as a local Labour councillor for the borough of Crawley, just south of London, from September 2000 till May 2010, and several months later announced to her hometown that she was transgender. She then spent the next 9 years raising trans awareness in her local area by acting as a trans officer for LGBT Labour, as well as going on to work for Disability Pride Brighton. She was a fucking awesome lady by the sounds of things. My thoughts are with Julia and Rihanna's families. Rest in power, guys. Your work has absolutely made things better for trans people up and down the country, and absolutely made things better for me personally. Whilst things may seem pretty bad right now for trans people, things were a damn sight worse during their time, and they worked tirelessly to make things better. I hope you'll keep them in your thoughts, look into their lives, and find inspiration in them and their work, as I have done. Okay, moving right along to some entertainment news. First up, BBC veteran whodunit series Silent Witness has just kicked off its 22nd series with a two-parter based around some murders at a fictional transgender charity. I won't go too deep into it as I don't want to spoil it for you, but for those who don't know, the show is basically a bunch of doctors, clinicians and CSI types who solve murders by poking around the bodies of the dead. It's not exactly going to set the world on fire as a show, and it will probably be forgotten as the show is just fine. It's something to watch after work, but if we are to look at it as a marker for where trans people are in society today, it's pretty good. It unearths some truths and it has some information about where we stand. All the trans characters are portrayed by trans people to my knowledge. Some of them are pretty unknown, so I was unable to confirm this for sure, but I mean, we can identify our own, right? And I'm pretty sure that all the people involved who needed to be trans were trans. And it doesn't go too much into the Trans 101 cheesy crap like a lot of these shows have done in the past. And whilst the murder victims are transgender, which on the surface could be a bit... the truth is that, well, in these kind of shows, the whodunit types, they basically parachute into a different world. Like, sometimes it's model train collectors, sometimes it's people who think they are vampires. You get the idea. Like in an episode of CSI, a bunch of people will go and investigate a gambling ring or something, a bunch of murders around that. And what I'm saying is, we've made it to that level. The transgender community is at the same level as the train collectors, you know, in these shows. Basically, I'm taking this two-parter as a sign that we have basically made it to the bare minimum of humanity, at least in the eyes of television writers. I would say that if you like Case of the Week procedural genre stuff, and are interested in media examples of trans representation, give it a watch. You can watch both episodes on BBC iPlayer, and it's fine. The response from trans people has been mostly positive. They would have liked a show where trans people weren't getting murdered, but overall it was a pretty reasonable depiction of trans life and trans characters, and, you know, it was essentially about a bunch of hate crimes, which, again, showing trans people wrapped in tragedy is a bit of a cliche, but then, you know, spreading awareness of the kind of things that can face trans people, I think it kind of balances out. There was some idiots on Twitter who were saying stuff about how it pushes a liberal agenda down people's throats, but I think they're the same people that said the same thing when black people started showing up on TV. So what the fuck do they know? But anyway, moving on. From the pretty good to the incredible, I am so sorry to announce that Pose, the American prestige television spectacular about a bunch of trans people of colour navigating the New York ballroom culture of the 80s, has been royally snubbed at this year's Golden Globes. Which is incredible to me, because it was by far the best show of last year, and I have already bored you lot to tears in previous episodes by going on about how good this show is, but that's because it is so awesome and deserved to sweep the board. But unfortunately, the show has debuted the same year as the excellent Killing Eve came out, as well as the last series of The Americans, which was an excellent show that I loved to bits, so I can't complain too much, although I am gonna. Pose lost out on the best drama series to The Americans. Billy Porter, who plays Pray Tell on the series, lost out on Best Actor to Richard Madden for his role in Bodyguard, which is fine, I guess. The Bodyguard was alright, but it's Pray Tell! Pray Tell! My God, what were they thinking? And the biggest crime was that MJ Rodriguez wasn't even nominated for her role as Blanca, which is one of the biggest crimes to have ever happened. That may be hyperbole, but it doesn't mean it's not true. This show deserved so much more than it got. Go watch it now if you can. There are rumours that the BBC have a deal with FX to show Pose at some point, but who knows when that's going to happen. Go watch it anyway you can. It's the best trans show of all time, and you need it in your life. And another thing that you need in your life, leftist YouTuber legend H-Bomber and fellow Aberystwyth graduate. I went to Aberystwyth, so did he. Didn't know that until I started researching this episode. I thought that was quite cool. But anyway, H-Bomber is doing a fundraising stream for Mermaids where he will attempt to complete the whole of Donkey Kong 64, the classic N64 game, in one sitting. The stream starts at 8:30 on Friday the 18th of January and is likely to go on for 24 hours plus because it is not an easy game to complete in one sitting. You can find the stream at twitch.tv/HBomberGuy, and you can also check out his excellent announcement video on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/HBomberGuy. Both links will be in the description. It appears that he has chosen to support Mermaids because of a certain Irish TV writer and shit goblin that I have talked about extensively on this podcast. And this whole exercise is apparently a massive fuck you to him, so I encourage you to go and get in on the act. I will be there in the chat room for the stream. Probably not for all of it, but I'll be popping in and out over those 24 hours. Not sure what my Twitch name is at this point. I'll probably tweet it out. I'm not a huge Twitch person, but I will be there, so if you want to chat with me and watch a very funny guy play a great video game and raise some money for Mermaids, tune in to Twitch at 8:30 on Friday the 18th. Okay, so that does it for the news this week. So I'm going to move on to the main story, which is a very personal one. And I'm going to get pretty deep here. A little nervous. This isn't something that I've ever told anyone, like, on this scale. I mean, our listener numbers are modest, but they are not... I mean, we've got about 200 of you out there listening to this, and I've never told this many people this kind of stuff at once. But I just need to tell it in its entirety from the top, so you have context for everything else I want to say. So here's the trigger warning. This section of the show will include references to mental health disabilities, physical disabilities, suicide, self-harm, drug abuse, and issues around the horrors of the current Department of Work and Pension situation in regards to accessing benefits, as well as issues surrounding getting healthcare and navigating through the NHS. If this stuff is a major trigger for you, please take this under advisement, and I won't hold it against you if you skip the rest of the episode. Chances are, if those things are a trigger for you, then you probably are very aware of the issues I will be raising, and all I can say is solidarity. I've been there too, and it's the fucking pits. Okay, so now that you know that, let's dive right in, I guess. Okay. So I came out as a transgender woman at the end of 2012, which, well, you say coming out is a process. It took me maybe a year to come out to absolutely everyone in my life. I mean, I had to do it in blocks. That's sort of the thing TV shows don't get about coming out. It's that you tend to be doing it for a very long time, if not for the rest of your life. But coming out roughly at the end of 2012 was an especially strange time to come out as transgender, as it was about the time that trans visibility really started to kick off. But for the first 2 years of my new life, things were incredibly and personally chaotic. Going through the gender identity pathway in the NHS involved endless waiting times, navigating clueless GPs who had no idea how to proceed, and I had to do 5 months of therapy with a psychosexual psychologist who seemed to be far more interested in what I thought about when I orgasmed than my gender identity and the challenges that my gender identity had brought up in my life. I had to go through that before being allowed on the waiting list for the gender clinic. It would take me another 18 months to get hormones, which makes me one of the lucky ones because that is so much shorter than people have to wait today. But coming out to my family was stressful, coming out of my work was a nightmare, some friends vanished, many stayed, I made more friends. It wasn't the most unusual path out of the closet, and many of you will have gone through exactly the same thing. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into the realities of coming out because, hell, you've all probably lived it. But the thing I want to focus on today is the fact that I had an underlying anxiety disorder all the way through this. And that had begun to present itself when I was in my late teens, around 2002, 2003. At this point, it was not debilitating. As a young person, I found ways to handle this, mostly by smoking heroic amounts of cannabis and listening to heavy metal. I only recommend one of those as a solution to your mental health problems if you have any, because, not gonna lie, weed is pretty great, but probably not the best medicine for mental health issues. Anyway, the events of coming out and all the carnage that can entail caused a severe rise in the severity of my condition. It went from being mostly manageable to around 2013, making it very difficult to do a full week's work at my job. Phoning in sick became a very commonplace, much to the annoyance of my co-workers, because they had to take up the slack. But I couldn't help it, I was sick. Self-harm became a thing I would do. That became a regular thing in my life. It was one of the few things that, the weird thing about self-harm is that it kind of works, but it doesn't. It makes you feel better in the moment, but it is just so much more destructive. So if that is an issue you are facing, I totally get it, but also tell your doctor about it because it also sucks. I'm not going to go on about it too much because it's such a big issue that even I don't fully understand, and I'm one of the people that did it. But anyway, the wheels totally came off the wagon in 2016. I basically had just lost a number of journalism jobs. I had to take a job working at McDonald's in South London to pay the bills, which is a hard job when you're not trans. But when you are, and are having full-blown panic attacks in the drive-thru as pissed customers are asking, "Dude, why are you wearing the girl's uniform? Why is your name Michelle?" It was clear that this wasn't sustainable. Also, on a related note, nothing will turn you into a full-blown socialist faster than working at McDonald's. Nothing. They treat their staff with utter disdain, and how anyone can come out of that not concerned about workers' rights, I do not know. So I walked out and quit. I had to, and I went straight to my GP and said that I was in trouble. I couldn't hold down a job. I was in real trouble in a way that I had not experienced before. It took me another year to realise that I had become disabled. My body still worked, but my mind had become a nightmare, which brings me pretty much up to date to 2019. These are still issues that I'm dealing with today. The NHS was not in a position to offer any real help. This wasn't the fault of any of the staff directly. They could have done better when it came to knowing about trans stuff and trans people, but overall, what care I got was good when I could get it. The problem was I couldn't get the help I needed. Getting to see a psychiatrist was nearly impossible, and involved waiting months for an appointment, which wasn't ideal because every day hurt in a way I don't think I will ever be able to describe. So I will let this fantastic writer Andrew Solomon describe it. This is from a TED Talk he gave back in 2015.
If you told me that I have to be depressed for the next month, I would say as long as I know it'll be over in November, I can do it. But if you said to me, you have to have acute anxiety for the next month, I would rather slit my wrist than go through it. It was the feeling all the time, like that feeling you have if you're walking and you slip or trip and the ground is rushing up at you, but instead of lasting half a second the way that does, it lasted for 6 months. It's a sensation of being afraid all the time, but not even knowing what it is that you're afraid of.
So yeah, Andrew Solomon's a great writer. Check out all his books. He's fantastic. Check out his TED Talks. I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can watch the full talk. It is very enlightening for people who don't know about mental illness, and probably very, very good to listen to if you do suffer from the same kind of things. But it was during that hell that he just described that I had to apply for an employment and support allowance, which, for people who don't know, is the standard benefit for disabled people or people who are otherwise unable to work. This involved sending evidence of my income and dealing with an endless bureaucracy that I was in no state to handle. The application process involves filling in a form which felt like it had 100 pages and getting medical evidence from an NHS that could barely get me an appointment, let alone provide me with bits of paper confirming my condition. It was a nightmare. One time I remember calling up the psychosexual psychologist's office, the people I had to go see to get hormones and stuff, begging them for evidence, but they wouldn't release it to me because my voice did not sound like a woman's voice, according to them. They accused me of lying to get Michelle O'Toole's private information. Somehow, I got all the paperwork together. I can't even remember how, because that whole period of my life is a fucking blur, and they put me on the basic rate of 75 quid a week, which allowed me to live a threadbare existence for about a year. I don't remember much from that year, because like I said, it was a bad one. But it got worse after a year when I received the notice that I was to attend a work capability assessment. My mind exploded when I got that. The work capability assessment has a very bad history, and for those who don't know, it was brought in by a Labour government in 2008 as a response to the endless stories in the press about people cheating the benefit system by claiming they were sick when they were not. So, yeah, that wasn't particularly great, but that's what they did. But the test itself became cruel and unusual, and I don't use those words lightly, once the Conservative government came in, and they changed it so everyone who claimed employment and support allowance had to undergo assessments, even if their doctors had already ruled that they weren't fit to work. No matter what the situation was, everyone who was claiming that benefit had to go through the assessments. The stories of those assessments are rarely good. There have been reports of assessors outright lying about what was said in the assessments, and that there's this points-based system that they use to assess people that is not fit for purpose, because, like with conditions like mine, they would ask me in the assessments, like, can you cook? And the truthful answer is, sometimes. But they have yes or no. So they would put yes, and I would risk being found fit to work, even though sometimes I can't do anything. Like, it's a really one or the other point system they've got that does not leave any room for, like, a holistic approach, which we'll go on to, and I'll explain how that's a bad thing later on, but the most damning indictment of the whole process was that many who were unfit for work were being wrongly categorised as fit for work. This was my biggest fear. I had tried to work 4 different full-time jobs with my condition, and it either ended with me being made redundant, straight up fired, or having to quit in the middle of a panic attack and running to my GP or the hospital, depending on the time of day, in a state of acute crisis. My first assessment, back in 2016, was somehow worse than I had expected. My 1 PM appointment did not start till 2 PM, leaving me to stew in the waiting room for an hour. So when my appointment did start, I was on the verge of a complete breakdown. The assessor never looked me in the eye, never looked away from her computer. She asked me humiliating questions about how often I showered and what my eating habits were. Both the answers to those questions were embarrassing to me, because most days I couldn't shower and my eating habits were mostly hideously disgusting. But the reality was that if I didn't tell this uncaring nightmare person the true horrors of my life, they would take my money away. And they would ask me questions like, about very traumatic experiences in my life that I had to relive right there in front of them. And I felt that if I didn't do this, I could be made homeless. It was one of the most horrific things to ever happen in my life. The fear that if I didn't sell my reality well enough, in spite of the fact that I barely could string a sentence together, and I had all these doctor's notes and all of these psychologist reports saying that I was clearly fucked, that they put me in a position where I could end up losing what little life I had. After already losing everything. I used to love my job. Like, not all the jobs I had. I had a lot of shitty jobs, but there was a couple of jobs there that I loved that I had to quit or I was fired from that I did not want that to happen. I'd already lost so much, and then I had to go through this humiliating process. And I had to do that again recently. I had another work capability assessment recently. I was supposed to do another episode 2 weeks ago. I was going to do one about Chelsea Manning, but that didn't happen because this assessment caused another crisis, you know? Like, I couldn't do it. I was living in fear. If it wasn't for my friend, who has chosen for me to refer to them by the name of Cloud for the purpose of anonymity in this, they are clearly a big fan of Final Fantasy VII, I would never have gotten through it. So, Cloud, if you're listening, thank you. I owe you, like, so much. I don't even know how I'll be able to repay this back. But I got through it again. The first time, they thankfully made the right decision. They agreed that I was too sick, and ironically, I think the thing that helped them come to that decision was the torturous experience of that assessment exacerbated my symptoms so much that they couldn't deny that my condition was very real. But I'm in limbo again, because the way they set up this assessment is they kind of set you up to fail. Like, with the questions they ask, you've got to sort of manage your answer to their specification, and that's not always possible when you are kind of messed up in the head, which I am. So some of you will be thinking, but you can't just give people benefits. Like, you have to know for sure that they are sick, that they are disabled, that they are incapable of holding down a job. You have to find that out, and I agree. But the thing is, I had a whole bunch of professionals who have seen me and treated me, sometimes in the case of my GP, for years, who was saying that I was unfit to work. I had notes from psychologists, I had a note from a psychiatrist, I had various evidence from several very qualified healthcare professionals in the NHS saying I could not work. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have that. They put you through this horrific system no matter what. And I think that is a huge problem because it causes so much suffering, so much horror, when there doesn't need to be. You could totally go get a note from your doctor and be signed off, and that should be enough. But at this point, it isn't. It's like they put this extra hurdle in front of disabled people to try and lower the amount they're paying, rather than truly trying to work out who needs what a person actually needs. Anyway, why am I telling you all this? Because I want to give a story, a real human story, for context as to what this issue is. And to make the point, here is another clip from a TED Talk I saw recently by writer and journalist Amelia Abraham.
Earlier this year, every month, I used to go for lunch with a group of my female friends. Of the four of us who would meet up in a restaurant that was definitely posher than we could afford, one of us happened to be transgender. Now, like a lot of women before us, we used to do something really, really embarrassing at those lunches. Something that you will not believe still happens in 2018. We used to argue over who was Miranda, Carrie, Charlotte, and Samantha from Sex and the City. But eventually, we had to stop meeting up for lunch. My friend who was trans kept having to cancel because her mental health wasn't up to it. Because while three of us could use the bathroom of our choosing without having to think twice, my friend was scared to do so, scared that she wasn't welcome. My friend, one of the bravest people I know, the Samantha of the group, was finding it difficult to leave the house.
What happened to me, and what's continuing to happen to me, is happening to trans people on a massive scale. Trans people are far more likely to suffer from mental health issues than cis people, not because of being trans, but because of the things that get thrown at trans people uniquely. And trans people are just as capable of becoming or being physically disabled as anyone else. This is the life facing many people, but trans people are more at risk of being put in this situation. There is an NHS that doesn't have the money to provide the adequate healthcare needed, and this means that more people are at risk of having to sign off from work over the long term as they wait for treatment that they might not get, or if they do get, might not even work. I was one of the lucky ones. But here are the stats that paint the wider picture of what this cruel and unusual system can do. According to government figures, 2,380 people have died within 2 weeks of being found fit for work. A further 1,340 people died within 2 weeks of appealing a fit for work decision. Between 2013 and 2015, 56% of work capability assessment appeals were successful. If half the appeals are successful, what does that tell you about this assessment process? Clearly the assessment process doesn't work if it's getting it wrong half the time. Even the UN has weighed on the assessment, saying that the work capability assessment process and the government's disability reforms amounted to grave and systematic violations of disabled people's rights. In a recent report by The Independent, they revealed that nearly half of people surveyed on out-of-work disability benefits have attempted suicide. I'll include links to where I got this information in the pod description, but with the suicide rates already alarmingly high in the transgender community, our community must take action on these issues. I mean, I don't think I'm overselling it when I say that this is a catastrophic crisis that faces the trans community right now, and the wider general public. So, what do we do about it? How are we going to take action? I mean, I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of things that you can do to help, and also a few things that you can do to help yourself if you find yourself in this position. Some things that I've learned from personal experience, and some things I've learned from obsessively Googling over and over again all the issues around this. First off, most important thing, write to your MP. Email them, call them, tweet them. If you have a story to tell, tell it. If you have a friend who's had this happen to them, tell your friend's story if they give you permission to do so. This may seem pointless because, you know, MPs are going to do what MPs do, but it absolutely isn't the case. The more questions your MPs raise in Parliament about this issue, the more pressure is on the government to actually do something about it. If you are facing an assessment, you can get help from Mind, the mental health charity, and the Citizens Advice Bureau can assist you when it comes to filling in the forms and dealing with the bullshit. Links will be in the description. If you are getting an assessment, whether it be for PIP or employment and support allowance, you have the right to have the assessment recorded. Demand this. They don't want you to know about it, but it is your right. My local assessment centre only has 1 or 2 machines and only does the recordings twice a day. So you will probably have to wait a very long time, and I'm pretty sure that's by design because they don't want you to record it, because then you've got a tape, and if you go to the appeal and you've got a tape, you're probably going to win. So get that tape. That tape will be invaluable to you if things go wrong. Show your friends and family the film I, Daniel Blake. This film came out just before my first assessment and was shown again on BBC just before my second. This film followed me around. The film did not help my mental state at those times, but it is an invaluable tool that shows just how callous the benefit system has become. I cannot think of a better tool to get people fired up. And finally, I just want to say that you aren't alone. I sure as shit wasn't alone. Reach out to your community. Reach out to your friends and family. My relationship sure as hell saved me. You can and you will get through this. I mean, I did, and I couldn't have done it without the help of the people in my life. I mean, I think this may sound a little bit muddled, but I'll try and conclude a bit on, a note, I guess. What has happened to me over the last few years? Fuck. I believe that this is one of the most important issues facing trans people today. And, it could be argued that this isn't something that just faces trans people. But the simple fact is that we suffer a hell of a lot of disability in our community. Both physical and mental. The lives we lead, the stuff that we have to take in our everyday, it can have a massive toll that can make you sick. And maybe that disability will be permanent, maybe it will be temporary. I hope to God it's temporary in my case, because I have things I want to do with my life, and right now it doesn't feel like I'm getting all the help that I could to do that. And I don't want to go on an anti-Tory rant. I mean, some of you will probably vote Tory, and I want to respect your views, but the policies of this government have had a very personal effect on me in my life, so I do feel a bit bitter towards the Conservative Party. But the simple fact is, this is something that is happening to so many of us, and we need your help. We need to fight this as well as the other battles. And now that the consultation on the Gender Recognition Act has been wrapped up, we need to steal away the conversation from people that want to talk about how trans people are potentially rapists and stuff, and focus it on this, because this is one of the biggest killers in our community right now. Suicide is probably our biggest killer as a community, and the process of getting help, both from the NHS and from the welfare state, is fundamentally broken and exacerbating the situation. So, I don't want to leave on a note of doom and gloom. These are things we can absolutely change. Like I said before, contact your Member of Parliament, make a big rabble, tell your story, and next week, I want to tell some of your stories. I tried to get a few people's stories for this episode, but The simple fact was I didn't make enough time for it. This episode was sort of cobbled together very much at the last minute. That was a fault on my part. So I only gave people 3 days to reply to my tweet asking for people's stories. But next time I want to be able to tell some of your stories. So contact me on the various ways that you can contact me. I will sum all those up at the end. And let me know how you want to tell your story. You can do it anonymous. Potentially, if you're able, you could be directly on the show yourself. You can tell it from your mouth. Or you can write a thing and I'll read it out. Or if you need help in any of those ways, because I imagine that a lot of you will have disabilities, so sometimes it may limit the way you can get your message out there. I will try and accommodate you as best I can. I think these are stories that need to be told, and I think the trans community needs to act on this in some way, because it is one of our biggest killers. Alright, I think that's the end of the episode, and it feels like a weird place to end, but I'm hoping that, I'll play the music about now and that will raise it up and the tone change won't be quite as jarring. Did I fail? Did I succeed at that? Get in touch. Let me know what you think of the episode. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what's important to you. Just talk to me. Come talk to me. You can contact me at WhatTheTrans on Twitter. You can get me on Facebook, facebook.com/WhatTheTrans. You can get me on the official website. You can get that on whatthetrans.wordpress.com. And yeah, get in touch. Let me know what you think. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. Let me know what I'm doing right. And again, tell me your Department of Work and Pension stories. Tell me your disability benefit stories. Tell me your NHS stories. I'm going to read out the best ones that I get next time. So yeah, send those in. Thank you for listening and goodbye.